Welcome to History Teller YT, where forgotten voices of the past come alive. Today, we journey into one of the oldest living faiths of the Philippines, the Subanen Ancient Religion, Megayep. Long before Islam spread in Mindanao, and centuries before Spanish missionaries arrived with Catholicism, the Subanen people already had a complete spiritual system. Megayep is not only about rituals. It is a worldview shaped by rivers, forests, ancestors, and the eternal Creator, Magbabaya. In this history, you'll discover the sacred cosmology of Gulian, Dlumbang, and Baya, the role of the Balian, the priest, healer, and guide, the Buklog Thanksgiving ritual that shakes the heavens, and the epic chants, Gumen, that preserve memory across generations. You'll see how the Subanen resisted colonization, how they kept their traditions alive despite centuries of pressure, and why their ecological wisdom speaks urgently to our modern world. This is not just a story of survival. It is a living testimony that true faith does not need palaces or armies to endure. It needs balance, gratitude, and memory. So stay with us as we bring to life a 2-hour journey into the heart of Subanen spirituality. By the end, you'll see that Megayep is more than a religion. It is a timeless philosophy of harmony that still matters today. Long before the Spanish ships reached Philippine shores, long before the crescent of Islam arrived in the south, and even before written chronicles began to shape the narrative of the archipelago, the Subanen people of the Zamboanga Peninsula had already nurtured a faith both profound and complete. This ancient system, known as Megayep, was not just a series of rituals, but an entire worldview, a living cosmos where the rivers whispered prayers, the forests hummed with unseen guardians, and the sky above reflected the presence of a creator they called Magbabaya. To the Subanen, existence itself was a sacred conversation between humans, nature, and spirit. Every action, every offering, every chant served to maintain this delicate balance. Today, as globalization encroaches and the digital age accelerates cultural forgetting, the need to preserve such wisdom has never been more urgent. This history, therefore, is not merely a study of belief, but an act of remembrance, ensuring that the wisdom of Megayep continues to illuminate future generations. The very name Subanen derives from Suba, meaning river, and so they are the river people. To outsiders, rivers may be nothing more than water that cuts through the land. But to the Subanen, rivers are the veins of the world, sacred arteries connecting the human realm with the spirit realms above and below. From birth to death, from planting to harvest, the river's current was both witness and participant in their lives. Settlements clustered along waterways, not simply for survival, but for spiritual alignment. The Subanen saw themselves as stewards of the land, their kinship networks mirroring the branching flow of rivers, with elders guiding the community like great tributaries feeding into the main current of tradition. This connection laid the foundation of Megayep, for it was in nature's rhythms, the flow of rivers, the rustle of forests, the call of birds, that divine messages were first heard and later chanted by their priests, the Balian. To understand Subanen spirituality is to first understand this sacred intimacy with nature. While empires rose and fell across Asia, Majapahit in Java, Srivijaya in Sumatra, and even the early sultanates of Mindanao, the Subanen continued to live by the rhythm of Megayep. Unlike imported religions that demanded conversion, Megayep had no armies, no palaces, no temples of stone. Its sanctuary was the forest clearing, its altar the riverside, its scripture the memory of elders carried through Gumen, the sacred chants. And yet, in its quietness, it displayed a sophistication equal to the world's great faiths. It spoke of cosmology, of the journey of souls, of justice and harmony. To the Subanen, morality was not enforced by foreign kings, but by the unseen balance of the cosmos itself. This resilience would later prove vital when foreign missionaries sought to uproot their beliefs. But in these earliest centuries, before contact, Megayep thrived in pure form, a faith that was both local and universal, intimate to the Subanen, yet deeply connected to truths that transcend all cultures. The Subanen are among the most ancient peoples of Mindanao, and their very identity is tied to the rivers that snake across the Zamboanga Peninsula. The word Subanen itself comes from Suba, meaning river, and Nin, meaning people. Thus, they are the river people, and in this name lies their entire philosophy of existence. To the Subanen, rivers were not passive features of geography, but living entities, breathing spirits whose flow connected heaven, earth, and underworld. Along these banks, they built their villages, often in scattered settlements, each household tracing its lifeline to the current. The river served as their road, their source of food, their bath, their drinking well, and most of all, their sacred threshold where human and spirit worlds touched. Children were taught from infancy that to pollute the water was not only an offense against nature, but a violation of spiritual law. In songs, myths, and chants, the river was described as an elder, a guide who carried the voices of prayers downstream toward unseen deities. Unlike other communities that built massive towns, the Subanen preferred smaller riverside settlements, each one linked more by kinship and ritual than by political rule. This decentralization made them resilient against conquest, for no single blow could erase a people whose lifeblood was scattered across so many currents. Their civilization grew organically from this watery foundation, forming the unique worldview that would later crystallize into the religion of Megayep. The social fabric of Subanen life was woven tightly around kinship and cooperation. Unlike societies that emphasized strict hierarchies, the Subanen operated on bilateral kinship systems, tracing family ties through both mother and father, thus strengthening bonds across clans. Cooperation was not a choice, but a necessity in the challenging environment of the upland forests and river valleys. Farming, fishing, and hunting required collective effort, and rituals were always performed communally, reminding every member that the welfare of one was the welfare of all. Their farming practices reflected deep ecological wisdom. Swidden fields carved into hillsides, careful rotation to prevent soil exhaustion, and offerings to land spirits before clearing new plots. Fishing was preceded by chants seeking permission from river guardians, ensuring that human need did not cross into greed. Even hunting was never done recklessly. Before taking the life of an animal, hunters invoked prayers, recognizing the sacred exchange between life and sustenance. Within this world, law was not enforced by written codes, but by oral traditions. Elders recited proverbs, myths, and stories, passing down lessons of balance and respect. Violations of communal harmony, such as theft, deceit, or disrespect for rituals, were corrected not by prisons, but by reconciliation, mediated by the Balian or respected elders. Thus, Subanen society stood as a model of balance, where survival was achieved not through domination of nature, but through partnership with it. Their daily life itself was a prayer to Megayep, expressed through labor, kinship, and ritual. At the core of Subanen culture lies its language, a melodic and metaphor-rich tongue that functioned as both communication and sacred vessel. Unlike written systems that fix words on paper, Subanen traditions lived in the oral realm, where chants, songs, and stories carried history across generations. The most sacred of these were the Gulian, long, epic chants performed by elders and Balians, recounting cosmology, genealogies, and moral codes. Through rhythm and repetition, the Gulian ensured that knowledge was not lost but engraved in memory. The spoken word was believed to hold spiritual force, for uttering a chant was not merely performance, but participation in divine reality. This oral tradition extended even into law and medicine. Disputes were resolved by recalling ancestral precedents told in story form, while healing involved the recitation of invocations believed to realign body and spirit. In this way, language itself became the heartbeat of Subanen survival, binding their communities together even in the face of outside pressures. To lose their language would have meant to lose their soul, for within their words live the rivers, the forest, the ancestors, and the gods. Their chants functioned as libraries, their storytellers as living archives. This reliance on oral memory might appear fragile to outsiders. Yet it was precisely this flexibility that allowed the Subanen to adapt and endure. Unlike brittle stone or paper that crumbles with time, memory renews itself in every telling, each generation weaving new strands while retaining the sacred core. In the end, it is this oral strength that preserved Megayep against the erasures of conquest and colonization. The Subanen faith of Megayep is not a religion born of conquest, nor one imported by foreign prophets. It is a tradition that germinated from the soil of the Zamboanga Peninsula itself. To understand its depth, one must look at the long arc of human habitation in Mindanao. Archaeological traces, stone tools, pottery shards, burial sites suggest that communities related to the Subanen have lived in these lands for thousands of years. Long before the great Indianized kingdoms rose in Java and Sumatra, long before Islam spread through the sultanates, the Subanen had already formed a spiritual worldview centered on balance with nature and the unseen world. Megayep arose organically. Its gods were not distant monarchs, but familiar presences felt in rivers, forests, mountains, and skies. Its laws were not decrees etched into tablets, but lessons whispered by elders through chants and rituals. In this way, Megayep was not only older than the arrival of Christianity and Islam in the Philippines, but older even than the empires whose ships carried those religions. When outsiders speak of primitive religion, they misunderstand. Megayep was never primitive. It was sophisticated, integrated, and complete, a cosmic system that guided morality, health, ecology, and identity. The Subanen did not need external prophets, for the rivers were their scriptures, the forests their temples, and the Balian their interpreters of divine will. At the heart of Megayep lies a tripartite cosmology that maps the universe into three interconnected realms: Gulian, Dlumbang, and Baya. Gulian is the highest realm, a luminous world of eternal harmony where Magbabaya, the supreme creator, resides. It is here that the souls of the righteous, called Gimikud, arrive after death, reuniting with ancestors and basking in endless abundance. For the Subanen, Gulian was not an abstract promise, but a living reality. Its echoes were felt whenever prayers reached the heavens during rituals like Buklog. The second realm, Dlumbang, is the middle world, the human earth where struggles unfold. Here, people live, farm, marry, die, and must carefully maintain Pamyahonan, the sacred balance with spirits and fellow beings. Every tree felled, every fish caught, every word spoken carried weight, for imbalance could invite disaster. The third realm, Baya, is the shadowy underworld. It is the domain of lost souls, those who neglected rituals, disrespected ancestors, or broke the harmony of Megayep. Yet unlike Christian hell, Baya is not eternal damnation. It is a state of imbalance and wandering, where the soul suffers the consequences of neglect, but may still be remembered in chants and offerings. This cosmology reveals the ethical genius of Megayep. Morality is not imposed by fear of punishment, but arises from the recognition that harmony sustains life itself. The Subanen walked each day with awareness that their actions resonated across all three realms, tying them inextricably to the fates of spirits, ancestors, and future generations. Central to Megayep is the belief in the Gimikud, the soul that animates every person. Life is understood as a sacred trust. Each human carries within them a spiritual essence borrowed from Magbabaya, and their duty is to nurture it through right living, respect for nature, and observance of ritual. When death comes, it is not seen as an end, but as a passage. The Gimikud departs the body and begins its journey, guided by the chants of the Balian and the offerings of the community. A soul properly honored through funerary rites ascends toward Gulian, welcomed by ancestors who wait at the threshold. But a soul neglected or dishonored may lose its way, drifting into Baya where it lingers in unrest. This journey underscores the Subanen conviction that community responsibility does not end with death. The living must care for the dead through remembrance, and the dead continue to guide the living as ancestral spirits. Unlike many world religions that draw sharp boundaries between life and afterlife, Megayep emphasizes continuity, a seamless flow between generations, realms, and realities. Just as rivers connect mountains to the sea, so too do souls connect the past, present, and future. This understanding gave the Subanen a profound resilience. While empires waged wars and dynasties fell, the Subanen anchored themselves in the eternal rhythm of the soul's journey. For them, history was not measured in the rise and fall of kingdoms, but in the unbroken chain of souls moving from Dlumbang to Gulian. This unshakable spiritual continuity is perhaps the greatest testament to the ancient endurance of Megayep. In every society, there arises a figure who stands at the threshold between the visible and invisible, who speaks not only to fellow humans, but to the spirits that shape the cosmos. For the Subanen, this figure is the Balian, a priest, healer, and mediator who embodies the very essence of Megayep. To outsiders, the Balian might appear as a shaman or witch doctor, but within the Subanen worldview, their role was far more profound. A Balian is not simply a practitioner of magic, but the living bridge between Dlumbang, the earthly realm, and the higher and lower planes of Gulian and Baya. The Subanen believe that not everyone can become a Balian by mere desire. The calling is chosen by signs from Magbabaya and the spirits themselves. Often, a child who experiences unusual dreams, sudden illnesses, or visions of ancestors may be marked as one destined to take up this sacred duty. The apprenticeship is long, involving memorization of chants, mastery of medicinal herbs, and discipline of body and spirit. Unlike political leaders who command through authority, the Balian leads through service, humility, and the ability to keep harmony alive. Without them, the community risks imbalance, for the Balian is the one who ensures that prayers rise upward, offerings are accepted, and the souls of the departed find their way home. They are not merely individuals, but custodians of an unbroken covenant between the Subanen and the universe. Among the most important functions of the Balian is healing. For the Subanen, illness is rarely seen as a purely physical affliction. A fever may signal not just infection, but the displeasure of a river spirit. Weakness may mean that one's gimmicut has strayed from the body. The Balian diagnoses through trance, dreams, and ritual, seeking the true cause of suffering. Herbs, roots, and leaves, gathered with prayer, form part of the cure, but they're never sufficient alone. Healing requires restoring harmony between body, soul, and spirit world. Thus, the Balian chant invocations, offering betel nut, rice, or chicken to appease offended spirits. In some rituals, they perform the Pagbui Sa Gimmikud, calling back a wandering soul that has left the body due to fright or neglect. The Balian also guides souls in death, leading the funerary chants that help the departed reach Gulian rather than wander in Baya. This dual role, healing the living and guiding the dead, makes the Balian indispensable. They are physicians of both flesh and spirit, their knowledge encompassing not only remedies for wounds and disease, but also ceremonies for psychological and communal health. When famine strikes or misfortune lingers, it is the Balian who performs rituals to restore balance. When marriages are sanctified or children are named, it is the Balian who ensures ancestral blessing. In every turning point of life, the Balian is there, not as a ruler, but as a servant of cosmic order. The role of the Balian extends far beyond ritual performance. They are also teachers and guardians of memory. Because Subanen traditions are rooted in oral transmission, the Balian functions as a living library. They memorize the sacred chants known as Gumen, lengthy recitations that recount the origins of the world, the stories of ancestors, and the moral code of Megayep. To listen to a Balian chant is to be immersed in poetry that blends history, law, medicine, and theology into one continuous stream. Apprentices sit at their feet for years, absorbing not only words but rhythm, tone, and the subtle ways of aligning speech with spirit. The clothing of the Balian also reflects their role. White garments embroidered with sacred motifs symbolize purity, while scarves and headbands mark their ritual authority. But their true power does not lie in dress or appearance. It lies in the respect to the community and the trust that their words are binding because they echo the wisdom of Magbabaya and the ancestors. In times of crisis, whether plague, war, or displacement, it is the Balian who anchors the community, reminding them of who they are and what balance must be restored. In this way, the Balian is not just a priest or healer, but the soul of the people. As long as the Balian continues to chant, the Subanen remain connected to their roots, their gods, and their future. Through them, Megayep survives not as a relic, but as a living guide. The Subanen worldview treats every stage of life as sacred, and each transition is marked by rituals designed to protect the Gimmikud, soul, and align the individual with ancestral blessings. At birth, naming ceremonies are performed in which elders invoke the spirits of forebears to watch over the newborn. The chosen name is not arbitrary. It often reflects ancestral memory, linking the child to the lineage of the past. As children grow, initiation rites mark their readiness to take on responsibilities within the clan and the community. Marriages are not merely unions of two individuals, but of entire families and clans. During wedding ceremonies, offerings of rice, betel nut, and animal sacrifice are made, ensuring that ancestors bless the union with fertility and prosperity. The Balian's chants sanctify the moment, weaving the lives of the couple into the larger fabric of Megayep. Yet perhaps the most crucial life cycle, rite, is the funeral. For the Subanen, death is not an end, but a passage, and the greatest duty of the living is to guide the soul toward Gulian. The Balian leads chants that light the path of the Gimmikud, ensuring it does not stray into Baya. Offerings are made to ease the soul's journey, and communal mourning is expressed not as despair, but as solemn responsibility. Through these rites, the Subanen affirm that life is not isolated, but part of a continuous cycle, each stage bound by ritual and community care. Every milestone becomes an act of renewal, ensuring that both the individual and the community remain in harmony with cosmic order. Beyond grand festivals and life passages, the Subanen also performed ceremonies tied to the rhythms of daily survival. Agriculture, being their lifeblood, was infused with ritual from start to finish. Before clearing a field for planting, offerings were made to the guardian spirits of the land, asking permission and protection. Seeds were planted with chants invoking fertility, while harvest celebrations were filled with gratitude to Magbabaya for sustaining life. Fishing, too, had its rites. Before casting nets, fishermen would whisper invocations to river spirits, ensuring that their catch was blessed and not a cause of imbalance. Hunting, often a dangerous necessity, was also framed in ritual, with hunters seeking forgiveness before taking the life of an animal. Illness, on the other hand, was viewed as a disturbance of spiritual equilibrium. The Balian, acting as healer, performed Pagui Esse Gimmikud, calling back the lost soul of the sick person, or conducted rituals to appease offended spirits. Herbs and chants worked together, as physical and spiritual remedies could never be separated. These everyday rituals reflected the Subanen conviction that every act of life carried spiritual consequence. Whether planting rice, curing disease, or sharing food, each activity was embedded within the framework of Megayep. The sacred was never distant from the ordinary. It infused every breath, every step, every drop of water drunk from the river. Through these continuous rituals, the Subanen lived their religion not only in special moments, but in the fabric of everyday life, sustaining harmony with the natural and supernatural alike. When Spanish galleons anchored along the coasts of Mindanao in the 16th century, they carried not only muskets and trade goods, but also the Christian cross. Missionaries, often Jesuits or Augustinians, viewed the Subanen as souls to be converted, pagans in need of salvation. Yet they soon discovered that the Subanen were not blank slates waiting for religion. Instead, they encountered a people already rooted in an ancient system of faith, Megayep. The Spanish strategy was clear: establish missions along rivers, the arteries of Subanen life, and slowly draw the people into Christian rituals. Churches were built, schools established, and baptism was pressed upon the community. Yet conversion did not come easily. Geography itself worked against the missionaries. Subanen settlements were scattered across mountains and river valleys, often far from colonial centers like Zamboanga City. Even when villages agreed to occasional baptism or church attendance, most quickly returned to their rituals once the priest departed. The Subanen saw no contradiction in listening to the teachings of Christianity while continuing to practice bucklog or consult the Balian. If anything, they interpreted the new religion through the lens of Megayep, seeing the Christian God as perhaps another manifestation of Magbabaya. To the frustration of missionaries, the Subanen absorbed only fragments of Catholicism while preserving the heart of their own cosmology. Unlike coastal communities that fell more easily under Spanish control, the upland Subanen remained resilient. Their faith, tied to land and rivers, could not be uprooted by foreign doctrines alone. Long before Spain's full control of the Philippines, Islam had already entered Mindanao through traders, teachers, and missionaries from Malaysia and Indonesia. Coastal areas of Zamboanga, Sulu, and Maguindanao quickly became centers of Islamic learning and power, organized into sultanates that wielded both political and spiritual authority. The Subanen, however, remained largely outside these spheres. Living inland along rivers and mountain valleys, they engaged with Muslims primarily through trade. They exchanged forest products, resins, honey, and rattan for salt, cloth, and iron tools. Islamic influence was felt especially in dress, loanwords, and certain rituals, but conversion never fully took root. Part of this was due to the strength of Megayep, which already provided comprehensive explanations for the afterlife, morality, and divine order. Unlike other animist groups who gradually converted to Islam, the Subanen held fast to their ancestral ways, guided by the authority of the Balian and the unbroken cycle of rituals. Another reason was political. The Subanen valued their autonomy, and embracing the faith of powerful sultanates might have meant subordination. Still, contact with Islam was not hostile. There were instances of intermarriage, exchange of songs, and shared rituals of respect. In some cases, Subanen families incorporated Islamic prayers into their lives while still holding bucklog and agricultural rights. This blending illustrates how the Subanen engaged with foreign systems selectively, taking what was useful while keeping the spine of Megayep intact. By the time Spanish colonizers arrived, the Subanen had already proven their ability to withstand religious pressure while maintaining their spiritual independence. The encounter with both Catholicism and Islam gave birth to an interesting phenomenon: syncretism without surrender. The Subanen did not fully reject elements of outside religions. Instead, they reinterpreted them within their own framework. For example, some adopted the Christian cross, but used it as a protective charm in farming rituals, believing it to reinforce rather than replace their ancestral symbols. Others learned Islamic prayers and incorporated them into healing chants, treating them as additional blessings. But at the center, Megayep remained unbroken. The Balian continued to lead funerary rites, the bucklog continued to echo across rivers, and the moral code of harmony with nature persisted. This capacity for selective adaptation gave the Subanen remarkable resilience. Where other groups were assimilated, the Subanen developed layered identities, outwardly participating in Christian festivals or Muslim practices when needed, but inwardly loyal to their own ancestral faith. By the 19th century, Spanish chroniclers complained that the Subanen were hard to convert, resistant to catechism, and prone to superstition. Yet what they called superstition was in truth the persistence of Megayep, a faith that had withstood centuries of pressure. Even as the world around them transformed, colonial governments, trading systems, wars, the Subanen carried their spiritual heritage forward. This endurance is one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of Philippine religions. It shows that even under centuries of external domination, indigenous belief systems can remain vibrant when they are deeply rooted in land, community, and memory. The dawn of the 20th century brought challenges to the Subanen unlike any they had faced before. Spanish colonial rule had waned, but American colonization introduced new pressures: public schooling, Christian mission stations, and the spread of a money-based economy. Later, the Philippine Republic expanded into the uplands, bringing roads, schools, and commercial industries. Logging companies cut down forests, mining firms dug into ancestral lands, and migrant settlers moved into valleys once reserved for Subanen clans. With these changes, the Subanen were increasingly pushed away from their traditional lifeways. And yet, the wisdom of Megayep persisted. Though many were baptized in Christian rites or identified themselves as Muslims in public records, privately, they continued to honor ancestral traditions. Agricultural rituals still marked planting and harvest. Funerals still required the chants of the Balian. Children still learned the sacred Gulian through the voices of elders. This dual existence, public conformity, private continuity, was not hypocrisy, but survival. It allowed the Subanen to navigate the pressures of modern life while safeguarding the essence of their spirituality. The river settlements continued to echo with ritual songs, even as nearby towns buzzed with radios, markets, and schools. In the midst of rapid change, Megayep became the Subanen's anchor, grounding them in identity when the outside world threatened to sweep them away. By the mid-20th century, many Subanen communities lived what might be called layered identities. Outwardly, they could participate in Christian holidays like Christmas or attend Friday prayers with Muslim neighbors. These acts allowed them to coexist peacefully with dominant religious communities. But within their own villages, when life demanded sacred guidance, they turned back to Megayep. A woman giving birth would not call for a priest, but for a Balian. Farmers would not sow rice without first offering ritual food to land spirits. During funerals, the soul of the departed was not entrusted to church liturgy, but to ancestral chants guiding it toward Gulian. This adaptability was not mere compromise. It was cultural strategy. By integrating selective elements of foreign religions, the Subanen shielded Megayep from erasure. They gave outward respect to newcomers while quietly reaffirming their loyalty to the old ways. The bucklog, for instance, continued to be performed, though sometimes with new layers of meaning, framed as a cultural celebration to avoid suspicion from missionaries or government officials. Through this quiet resilience, Megayep endured, proving that faith need not be rigid to survive. It could bend like bamboo, yielding to storms but never breaking. What outsiders mistook as religious confusion was in fact sophisticated cultural diplomacy. The Subanen ensured peace with neighbors while remaining Subanen at the core. Today, the Subanen face the paradox of both greater threats and greater opportunities. On one hand, globalization, migration, and environmental destruction continue to weaken traditional lifeways. Younger generations often prefer schoolbooks and smartphones to ancestral chants, and ancestral lands face ongoing encroachment from industries. On the other hand, recognition of indigenous rights has grown, and international organizations now acknowledge the value of Subanen traditions. The Bucklog ritual, for example, has been recognized by UNESCO as part of the world's intangible cultural heritage, ensuring documentation and global respect. Community elders and cultural advocates have begun recording chants, myths, and rituals to preserve them for future generations. Some Subanen youth now study their heritage in schools specifically designed to integrate indigenous knowledge with formal education. Cultural organizations organize festivals, workshops, and storytelling sessions where elders pass down the wisdom of Megayep. The Balian, once seen by outsiders as relics of the past, are now increasingly recognized as custodians of unique ecological and spiritual wisdom relevant to today's global crises. As climate change threatens ecosystems worldwide, the Subanen message of balance with nature resonates more strongly than ever. In this modern context, Megayep is no longer just the private faith of an isolated people. It is also a gift to the world, a reminder that humanity thrives not through domination, but through harmony. For the Subanen, practicing Megayep today is both an act of faith and an act of resistance, ensuring that their identity endures despite the currents of change. The Subanen Ancient Religion, Megayep, is not a fossilized relic from a forgotten age. It is a living testimony to human resilience, creativity, and harmony with nature. While history often glorifies empires and written civilizations, the endurance of Megayep reveals another kind of greatness, a wisdom preserved in chants, rituals, and riverside gatherings, passed from generation to generation without temples of stone or armies to defend it. For centuries, colonial powers labeled it superstition, missionaries called it error, and outsiders dismissed it as primitive. Yet the fact that it has survived to the present day is evidence of its strength. Megayep offered the Subanen not only a moral compass, but also a survival strategy, teaching them how to coexist with their environment, how to heal body and soul, and how to keep communities united in times of crisis. In a world where ecological destruction threatens all humanity, the Subanen philosophy of balance, reciprocity, and gratitude offers timeless lessons. Megayep's endurance reminds us that the world's oldest faiths often contain the keys to humanity's future. Yet survival cannot be taken for granted. As globalization expands, oral traditions face unprecedented risk. A chant not passed down is a library burned, and each elder who dies without a student is an entire archive lost forever. The Subanen know this, and so preservation efforts have become urgent. Documentation projects now record the Gulian chants, healing prayers, and bucklog rituals. Schools in Subanen territories are beginning to integrate indigenous knowledge alongside formal education, ensuring children grow up not only literate in books, but also fluent in their ancestral wisdom. Cultural organizations and community elders are working hand in hand to revitalize rituals that have fallen dormant, adapting them to the realities of modern life, while keeping their sacred essence intact. But preservation cannot rest on the shoulders of the Subanen alone. It requires respect and recognition from the wider world. Scholars, policymakers, and educators must treat Megayep not as folklore to be displayed, but as a spiritual tradition equal in depth to any world religion. Without such recognition, younger generations may continue to view their faith as something to hide, ashamed of its pagan label. Preserving Megayep, therefore, is not only a cultural duty for the Subanen, but also a moral duty for humanity at large. To remember Megayep is to remember who the Subanen are, but to share Megayep is to remind the world of what it means to live in balance. In the 21st century, when climate change, deforestation, and cultural homogenization threaten diversity, the lessons of Megayep stand as a gift. It teaches that rivers are not just resources but sacred lifelines, that forests are not commodities but temples of life, that ancestors are not forgotten, but living presences guiding each step. These teachings are not outdated superstitions, but urgently relevant truths for a planet in crisis. For the Subanen, to continue practicing Megayep affirms their dignity, resilience, and identity. For outsiders, to study and respect Megayep is to acknowledge that the wisdom of indigenous peoples is not marginal, but central to humanity's survival. The conclusion of this story is not an ending, but an invitation to preserve, respect, and learn. If Megayep is allowed to thrive, future generations, Subanen and non-Subanen alike, will inherit not only rituals and chants, but a worldview that honors life itself. In this way, the Subanen faith, older than empires and as enduring as rivers, continues to illuminate the path toward harmony in a fractured world. For the Subanen, the tripartite cosmos of Gulian, Dlumbang, and Baya was not an abstract diagram, but a lived reality that touched every moment of existence. Children were taught from their earliest days that their actions echoed across all three realms. When a hunter entered the forest, he did so with awareness that spirits in Dlumbang watched his every step, and that his success or failure was linked to ancestral favor in Gulian. When a farmer planted rice, the ritual offerings were not just gestures, but transactions ensuring harmony across dimensions. Even illness was interpreted through this framework. A soul weakened by imbalance might drift dangerously toward Baya, and only the intervention of the Balian could restore it. Unlike Western dualism, which often divides sacred and profane, heaven and earth, the Subanen saw no hard boundaries. The realms interpenetrated. Gulian could be felt in dreams and chants. Baya could manifest through misfortune or wandering spirits. And Dlumbang was the fragile stage where harmony had to be constantly maintained. The genius of this cosmology lay in its practicality. It was not a system to be debated in books, but a guide for living, ensuring that respect, gratitude, and caution structured everyday behavior. Through this worldview, the Subanen maintained not only moral order, but ecological balance. For to damage the environment was to disrupt the fragile threads connecting all realms. Central to this cosmology is the Gimikud, the soul or spiritual essence. The Subanen believe that the soul is like a flame entrusted to each person by Magbabaya. It must be cared for through right living, nourished by ritual and guided by ancestral memory. Death is not the extinguishing of this flame, but its transformation as the soul journeys onward. Funerary chants and rituals are therefore not simply mourning, but acts of navigation, helping the Gimikud find its way to Gulian. If forgotten or neglected, a soul may drift into Baya, restless and wandering. The living carry heavy responsibility for the dead, for ancestral souls continue to shape the fate of the community. To forget one's ancestors is to weaken the very foundation of society. This explains why the Subanen memory is so deeply genealogical. Families trace their lineages through oral chants, sometimes reciting names stretching back centuries. Each ancestor remembered is a presence still alive in the community, watching, guiding, and protecting. This continuity is beautifully symbolized by the river. Just as waters flow unbroken from springs to seas, so too does the line of souls flow from the unborn to the living and onward to the ancestors in Gulian. The river is both metaphor and reality, a reminder that life is fluid, unending, and always connected. In the Subanen worldview, immortality is not about individual survival, but about being remembered, honored, and woven into the flowing river of souls. Beyond cosmology and soul, Subanen oral tradition preserves myths that explain the origins of the world and the moral order of humanity. One such tale recounts how Magbabaya created the earth by stretching it from a drop of dew, shaping mountains, rivers, and valleys as places where spirits would dwell. Humanity, in this story, was not placed as master over nature, but as co-inhabitant, charged with care and respect. Other myths explain the origin of death. In one version, people once lived without dying, but arrogance and neglect of ritual angered the spirits, and so mortality entered the world as a consequence of imbalance. These stories were not told as entertainment, but as ethical maps, shaping the choices of listeners. To violate ritual law was not only to risk punishment, but to repeat the mistakes of mythical ancestors. Subanen myths also often feature animals as teachers, birds warning of danger, snakes punishing greed, or fish granting abundance to those who share. In this way, the moral code of Megayep was taught through narrative, embedding wisdom in memory. Unlike rigid written commandments, myths allowed flexibility, for each retelling could adapt to context while keeping the central lessons alive. Through these myths, the Subanen not only explained the world, but also reminded themselves that morality is older than law, older than empires, and as eternal as the rivers that sustain them. Among the Subanen, the most sacred vessel of tradition is not stone, parchment, or ink. It is the human voice. The Subanen oral tradition carries within it the weight of history, law, and cosmology, woven into chants known as Gumen. These long epics are performed by elders or Balians, often in the flickering glow of firelight, their rhythmic cadence transforming ordinary nights into sacred ceremonies. The Gumen are more than entertainment. To the Subanen, every word is alive, imbued with spiritual potency. To chant is to summon memory, to weave the present community into the tapestry of ancestral wisdom, and to invoke the presence of Magbabaya. The length of these chants is staggering. Some epics can last hours, even days, demanding stamina from both performer and audience. Yet the people listen attentively, for to miss a word is to lose a piece of their identity. The Gumen recount myths of creation, genealogies of clans, laws of kinship, and tales of moral triumph or failure. They serve as oral libraries in a society without books, preserving a universe of knowledge through rhythm, melody, and repetition. For centuries, even when Subanen communities lacked schools or written histories, the Gumen ensured continuity. Each time an elder performed, the community re-entered sacred time, collapsing past and present into one unbroken flow. The spoken word became scripture, memory, and law in a single breath. The Gumen are rich with themes that mirror the Subanen worldview. Heroes often arise not through brute strength, but through wisdom, humility, and respect for spiritual law. One epic recounts a young hunter who defeats a monstrous serpent not by violence alone, but by offering respect to the river spirits, who then aid him in his quest. Another tale tells of a woman who saves her village by weaving a cloth that reflects the stars, symbolizing patience, creativity, and cooperation. These narratives reinforce the moral code of Megayep. Harmony, respect, and balance are greater than pride or greed. In contrast, characters who ignore rituals or mock the spirits inevitably meet tragic ends, becoming cautionary examples for listeners. The Subanen do not separate myth from daily life. For them, these tales are living lessons that guide how to plant rice, raise children, honor ancestors, and resolve conflicts. The repetition of genealogies within the Gumen also serves a vital role. By tracing lineages back through generations, the Subanen reinforce kinship bonds, reminding everyone of their place in the extended community. Thus, the Gumen is not only myth, but also history, law, and moral compass. It is a dynamic art form that ensures each new generation inherits not only the stories, but also the values that sustain Subanen society. Despite their enduring importance, the Gumen now face fragility in the modern era. Younger generations, drawn to schools, cities, and media, often lack the patience to listen to hours-long chants. Many elders lament that fewer apprentices are willing to undergo the rigorous memorization required to master the Gumen. In the past, learning was an act of devotion, involving years of apprenticeship under a Balian, memorizing chants word by word, tone by tone. Today, that chain risks being broken. Yet efforts to preserve the Gumen are emerging. Cultural organizations are recording performances, scholars are transcribing chants, and some Subanen communities are hosting festivals where epic recitations are highlighted as treasures of identity. Still, many argue that the Gumen must remain living performance, not only text on paper, for its true power lies in the voice, the breath, the rhythm that binds speaker and listener together. To save the Gumen is not only to archive it, but to ensure that young Subanen take pride in chanting and hearing it. If preserved, the Gumen can continue to serve as the Subanen scripture, carrying their myths, ethics, and history into the future. If lost, the silence would mean not just the death of a tradition, but the fading of the Subanen soul itself. For the Subanen, justice is not a matter of written codes or rigid decrees. It is rooted in the principle of Pamuhunan, the balance that sustains life. Unlike state systems that rely on police, courts, and punishments, Subanen law is relational and restorative. A wrong committed against another is seen not only as a personal offense, but as a disruption of harmony that reverberates across families, spirits, and the cosmos itself. Theft, for instance, is not judged only by material loss, but by the damage it causes to trust within the community and the displeasure it may cause to guardian spirits who value fairness. To restore harmony, restitution is made not simply to the victim, but to the collective, often through offerings, reconciliation feasts, or symbolic acts of forgiveness guided by the Balian or respected elders. In this way, Subanen justice emphasizes healing rather than punishment. The goal is not to isolate the wrongdoer, but to reintegrate them into the community once balance is restored. This ethical system reflects the cosmology of Megayep, where every action has consequences across Gulian, Dlumbang, and Baya. To disrupt harmony is to invite misfortune. To restore it is to reaffirm life. In this sense, Subanen law is ecological, spiritual, and social all at once. A holistic vision of justice deeply relevant even in today's fragmented world. The backbone of Subanen's social order is kinship. Every member of the community is bound not just by blood, but by shared responsibility. In disputes, kinship networks are mobilized to mediate and repair bonds. A quarrel between two individuals is never a private matter. It is a matter for clans and, by extension, for the community as a whole. Because of this, the Subanen maintains strong genealogical memory, with elders reciting ancestral names to remind disputants that they are connected by blood, history, or shared spiritual obligations. Marriages, too, serve as legal and moral contracts, binding families together in webs of mutual duty. Children are raised not only by parents, but by extended kin, ensuring that no individual grows without guidance. Inheritance is also framed by communal values. Land, rivers, and forests are never the sole possession of one person, but the responsibility of a lineage. Even decision-making reflects this kinship ethic. Leaders are not authoritarian rulers, but mediators chosen for their wisdom and ability to maintain consensus. This emphasis on kinship and collective responsibility prevents the emergence of rigid hierarchies and reinforces equality within the group. The Subanen ethic, thus, stands as a counterpoint to modern systems where law often isolates individuals. In Megayep, law always reconnects people to one another and to the spirits that sustain them. Perhaps the most unique dimension of Subanen ethics is the recognition that justice is not only a human concern, but a spiritual responsibility. Every wrongdoing is believed to disturb the spirits, particularly the guardians of rivers, forests, and ancestors. To cheat a neighbor is also to offend the spirit of the land that nourishes both families. To neglect funerary rites is not only a failure to honor the dead, but an act that risks sending the soul of the deceased wandering into Baya, where it might trouble the living. For this reason, Subanen rituals of reconciliation often include offerings, not just to the offended party, but to the spirits who witnessed the offense. A chicken may be sacrificed, rice laid out, betel nuts shared, all as symbolic acts of rebalancing. The Balian plays a central role in this process, chanting invocations to restore cosmic equilibrium while guiding the community toward forgiveness. Importantly, the Subanen distinguish between mistakes of ignorance and acts of willful disrespect. The former can be corrected through teaching and minor offerings, while the latter require deeper rituals of cleansing. This flexible, restorative approach allows the Subanen to maintain order without the harsh punishment seen in other legal systems. In their worldview, justice is less about fear of authority and more about fear of imbalance. To live rightly is to live in tune with the flow of the universe. To commit wrong is to disturb that flow, endangering not just oneself but the entire community. Thus, Megayep transforms law from an external imposition into an internalized ethic of harmony, binding human action with spiritual accountability. For the Subanen, the environment is not a backdrop for human activity, but a sacred temple in which every tree, river, and mountain plays a role in the spiritual drama of life. Their very name, derived from Suba or river, reveals how deeply their identity is entwined with the land and waters. The Subanen worldview teaches that nature is animated by unseen spirits, each one possessing agency and deserving respect. Before cutting down a tree, a farmer whispers prayers to its guardian spirit. Before casting nets into the river, fishermen make small offerings to the spirits of the waters. This ethic is not superstition. It is a profound recognition that human survival depends on reciprocity with the natural world. Forests are seen as lungs of the earth, rivers as arteries of life, and mountains as ancestral abodes. To pollute or exploit them without ritual is to invite spiritual retribution. Illnesses, crop failure, or misfortune are often interpreted as signs of ecological disrespect. By treating nature as teacher and temple, the Subanen created an ecological philosophy that sustained their communities for centuries without depleting resources. This stands in stark contrast to modern systems of exploitation, where forests are stripped, rivers dammed, and lands mined without concern for spiritual or ecological balance. For the Subanen, ecology is sacred duty, not optional ethics. Subanen livelihood revolves around farming, fishing, and gathering from forests, all of which are enveloped in rituals that remind people of their obligations to the spirits of the land. Farming begins with the Pagpangeo essay, Kalyuoy, a ritual request for permission from guardian spirits before clearing new fields. Offerings of rice, betel nut, and animal sacrifice are made to ensure that the land blesses the crops rather than curses them. During planting, chants are recited to invite fertility, and at harvest, gratitude is expressed through feasts and sharing of food. Fishing is also ritualized. Before casting their nets, fishermen chew betel nut and whisper prayers into the river, asking for fish to be given freely, not stolen. In hunting, hunters ask forgiveness from the spirits of the forest, acknowledging that taking life is a grave act that must be balanced by respect. Even the gathering of honey, resins, or rattan is framed within rituals of reciprocity. These practices ensured sustainable use of resources, preventing overexploitation long before concepts like conservation entered global discourse. What science now calls sustainable development, the Subanen have long practiced as sacred obligation. By embedding ecological care into their religion, they guaranteed that each generation inherited a fertile land, clean rivers, and abundant forests. Their ecological spirituality is not merely symbolic. It is practical survival wisdom encoded into ritual. In the modern era, the Subanen face unprecedented threats to their environment. Logging companies, mining corporations, and agribusiness projects encroach upon their ancestral territories, cutting down forests, polluting rivers, and displacing communities. For the Subanen, these are not only economic or political challenges, but spiritual crises. To see a mountain leveled for minerals is to see an ancestral abode desecrated. To witness a river poisoned by chemicals is to watch the lifeblood of the community turn into sickness. Yet the Subanen respond not only with protest, but with ritual. Communities hold bucklog ceremonies to ask Magbabaya for strength, to reaffirm their bond with the land, and to call upon spirits for protection. Activists often frame their resistance not in legal terms alone, but in spiritual language. Mining is not just illegal, it is a violation of Megayep. This spiritual framing strengthens community unity, giving people courage to defend their environment even against powerful outsiders. At the same time, partnerships with NGOs, scholars, and cultural advocates are helping document these ecological rituals, bringing Subanen voices to global conversations on environmental justice. In this way, Megayep becomes both shield and spear, shielding the community's spirit from despair and arming them with moral authority to resist ecological destruction. The Subanen teach us that defending the environment is not simply about policy or profit, but about sacred duty, for the fate of the land is inseparable from the fate of the people who depend upon it. When state-sponsored schools were introduced into Subanen territories in the 20th century, they brought with them not only reading and writing, but also new ways of seeing the world. Children who once learned wisdom at the feet of elders, listening to Gulian chants by firelight, were now expected to memorize lessons from books, recite the national language, and adopt foreign histories as their own. On one hand, schooling opened doors. Literacy allowed young Subanen to navigate government systems, pursue higher education, and defend their rights through written law. On the other hand, it created a rupture in cultural transmission. Hours once devoted to oral storytelling were redirected toward textbooks, and children sometimes grew ashamed of ancestral chants labeled as superstition by teachers. Yet the Subanen found ways to adapt. Some elders began framing the Gulian as cultural literature, presenting it in schools not as religion, but as heritage. Others encouraged children to learn both, the knowledge of books to survive in the modern world, and the knowledge of chants to remain Subanen. This double literacy became essential. One alphabet written in ink, the other remembered in rhythm and breath. For the Subanen, Education became a double-edged sword, but also an opportunity to weave modern literacy into the preservation of Megayep. The arrival of radio, television, and eventually the internet has reshaped Subanen communities in profound ways. Radios brought distant voices into riverside villages. Televisions introduced images of cities, celebrities, and foreign lifestyles, and cell phones connected young Subanen to global networks. While these technologies provided entertainment and access to information, they also threatened to eclipse ancestral traditions. Younger generations, fascinated by popular songs and television dramas, sometimes lost interest in epic chants that lasted hours. Rituals that required collective participation now competed with screen-based distractions. Yet technology also opened new possibilities. Some cultural advocates began recording the Gulian and uploading them online, preserving voices that might otherwise vanish. Video documentation of buklog ceremonies now circulates on digital platforms, turning local rituals into global heritage. Community radio stations occasionally broadcast indigenous songs and oral histories, reclaiming media as a space of cultural pride. In this way, modern technology, though initially seen as a threat, has become an ally in preservation. The Subanen experience shows that media need not erase tradition. It can amplify it if communities claim it for themselves. Still, the battle for memory remains ongoing. Will the next generation scroll past their heritage, or will they use the very tools of modernity to safeguard it? Modernity has placed the Subanen in a position of constant negotiation. On government forms, many identify as Christian or Muslim, since these religions dominate official recognition. Yet in private, rituals of Megayep continue. Some Subanen youth adopt urban lifestyles, moving to cities for education or work, where they blend into cosmopolitan cultures. Others remain in their ancestral lands, sustaining traditional practices. This duality often creates tension. Young Subanen may feel torn between loyalty to their elders and the demands of modern life. Yet many are also discovering pride in their heritage. Advocacy movements, cultural festivals, and indigenous rights campaigns have sparked a resurgence of Subanen identity. Wearing traditional garments, performing buklog for national audiences, and speaking openly about Megayep are now acts of cultural assertion. Identity has become layered. One can be Subanen and Filipino, modern and traditional, Christian or Muslim outwardly, but still deeply loyal to ancestral faith. This negotiation is not weakness but resilience. It proves that the Subanen are not frozen in time, but are dynamic, capable of adapting while refusing to vanish. In the globalized world, identity is no longer a single mask, but a woven fabric, and the Subanen thread, bright and resilient, continues to shine. For centuries, the buklog was known only to the Subanen themselves, performed in riverside settlements far from colonial centers or urban cities. It was a ritual of thanksgiving, a sacred act that united the community and reaffirmed their connection to Magbabaya and the ancestors. Outsiders who witnessed it often misunderstood, describing it as mere dancing on a wooden platform or a curious indigenous festival. Yet within Subanen cosmology, the buklog is the highest expression of gratitude, a communal heartbeat offered to the heavens. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, anthropologists and cultural advocates began documenting the buklog, recognizing its uniqueness and spiritual depth. This effort culminated in its recognition by UNESCO as part of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. For the Subanen, this recognition was both an honor and a challenge. On the one hand, it validated their tradition in the eyes of the global community, proving that their rituals held value equal to world-famous cultural treasures. On the other, it placed their sacred ceremony under the spotlight, raising concerns about how to share it without reducing it to spectacle. The journey from remote valleys to the global stage reflects the resilience of Subanen culture, which has endured centuries of neglect, but now commands respect across the world. UNESCO's acknowledgement of the buklog is not merely symbolic. It affirms that Subanen traditions are essential to the cultural diversity of humanity and deserve protection. For many Subanen elders, the recognition served as vindication. What colonial authorities once dismissed as superstition, and what modern institutions often ignored, is now celebrated as world heritage. This shift has encouraged younger generations to take pride in their rituals, wearing traditional garments with confidence and participating actively in community ceremonies. The recognition also comes with commitments. documentation, safeguarding programs, and support for community-driven efforts to sustain the ritual. Yet challenges remain. Global recognition often attracts tourism, and there is danger that outsiders may pressure the community to perform bucklog on demand, stripping it of its sacred context. Elders insist that bucklog cannot be reduced to performance. It must remain tied to its religious and communal roots. Thus, UNESCO recognition is best seen as a tool. It provides resources, visibility, and protection, but the ultimate responsibility rests with the Subanen themselves to keep the heart of the ritual alive. The meaning of recognition, then, is not only about global applause, but about ensuring that bucklog continues to function as it always has, a thanksgiving to Magbabaya and a reaffirmation of communal harmony. The global spotlight has forced the Subanen to confront a difficult question. How can they share their traditions without losing their sacred essence? Cultural commodification is a real risk. Performances staged for festivals or tourists, if detached from ritual meaning, risk turning the bucklog into entertainment rather than prayer. Elders emphasize that while outsiders may be invited to witness, they must be taught the significance of each act. The pounding of the platform is not dance alone, but the sending of prayers upward. The offerings of rice and chicken are not mere tradition, but covenants with spirits. To safeguard authenticity, some communities have created guidelines, ensuring that bucklog is performed only on appropriate occasions, with rituals intact, even when audiences are present. At the same time, global recognition has allowed Subanen voices to enter international conversations about heritage, ecology, and indigenous rights. By presenting bucklog on their own terms, the Subanen demonstrate that sharing does not mean surrender. Instead, it becomes a form of teaching, inviting the world to respect, not consume, their culture. The challenge of balancing sacred preservation with cultural diplomacy is ongoing, but the Subanen show remarkable wisdom in navigating it. Their message is clear. The bucklog is not a relic of the past, nor a spectacle for outsiders, but a living heartbeat of a people, echoing gratitude across generations and now across the world. As we stand at the crossroads of past and present, the story of the Subanen and their ancient religion, Megayep, shines as a rare beacon of endurance. For thousands of years, this faith has weathered storms of conquest, resisted missionary pressures, and adapted to the tides of modernity without losing its soul. While kingdoms collapsed and empires crumbled, the chants of the Gulian, the pounding of the bucklog, and the healing hands of the Balian continued to echo along rivers and forests. This endurance is not accidental. It arises from the intimate bond between the Subanen and their environment, the deep kinship that frames social life, and the flexibility of a worldview that allows dialogue without surrender. Megayep has proven that survival is not about domination, but about harmony. Today, when global cultures often erase indigenous voices, the Subanen stand as living proof that spiritual systems born of land and memory can outlast foreign doctrines imposed by force. The endurance of Megayep reminds us that the true measure of a religion is not in grand monuments or armies of followers, but in its ability to sustain meaning, community, and balance across centuries. The wisdom of Megayep speaks not only to the Subanen, but to all of humanity. In an age of climate change, environmental destruction, and cultural homogenization, the Subanen message is profoundly relevant. Life thrives only when humans live in harmony with nature and one another. Their rituals remind us that rivers are not commodities, but lifelines. Forests are not resources, but sacred homes. And ancestors are not forgotten, but active guardians of the living. In a world where consumerism teaches us to take without limit, Megayep teaches reciprocity. Every harvest must be answered with gratitude, every hunt with prayer, every life passage with ritual care. In societies fractured by injustice and inequality, the Subanen ethic of restorative justice offers an alternative. Conflict healed not through punishment, but through reconciliation and balance. Even the concept of Gimikud, the soul that journeys beyond death, offers a vision of continuity that counters modern despair. It assures us that death is not the end, but a passage into a wider community of ancestors. That each generation lives not for itself, but as part of a river of souls flowing endlessly toward Magbabaya. These lessons are not relics of a primitive past. They are survival strategies for a fragile planet and a divided humanity. The final legacy of Megayep lies in its call to preservation and renewal. For the Subanen, remembering Megayep is remembering who they are. For the wider world, Engaging with Megayep is an invitation to respect diversity and learn from indigenous wisdom. The challenge of the present is clear. Oral traditions risk vanishing as elders pass without successors. Sacred lands face exploitation, and young people are lured by the fast pace of globalization. Yet there is also hope. With UNESCO recognition, with community schools integrating indigenous knowledge, and with cultural advocates recording chants and ceremonies, Megayep is entering a new era of visibility. The responsibility now lies with both Subanen and non-Subanen to honor the chants, to protect the rivers, to support the Balians, and to ensure that the next generation inherits not silence but song. If this is done, the flame of Megayep will not flicker out. It will grow brighter, illuminating not only the Subanen path, but also offering light to a world in search of balance. In the end, the story of Megayep is not only the history of one people, but a gift to humanity. A reminder that to live well is to live in gratitude, to honor ancestors, and to walk gently upon the earth. This is the enduring legacy of the Subanen, a wisdom as old as rivers and as timeless as the stars. And that brings us to the end of our journey into the Subanen Ancient Religion, Megayep. Today, we learned how the Subanen people built a faith older than empires, rooted in rivers, forests, and the eternal presence of Magbabaya. We saw how their Balian guided both the living and the dead, how the Bucklog echoed as a prayer of thanksgiving, and how oral traditions like the Gulian preserved wisdom across centuries. The moral of this story is clear. Megayep teaches us that survival depends not on conquest, but on balance between humans, nature, and the spirit world. It is a reminder that in our fast-changing world, indigenous knowledge still carries answers for the future. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to History Teller YT. Here, every story we tell opens a window into the past, giving us wisdom for today. Join us again for more histories that inspire, teach, and remind us of who we are. Until next time, stay curious, stay respectful, and keep the flame of history alive.